Welcome to money4mzansi, working toward a joy economy for all in South Africa by 2030. This is the second video in a 4-part video series. Please watch the 2 videos following on from this one. So in the first video, what we saw was basically how South Africa works, what money is, how it gets created, how we use it to create more productive assets leading to more jobs, and let's see how the cycle works. Basically, rich people and banks create business plans. Banks believe in the business plans. They create more money. We use the money to create productive assets in society, and that creates jobs. Jobs means that we can now also build homes for these people because they can pay back the debt associated to creating the homes. And that means also there's more money in the economy, and therefore government will be able to collect tax. And it's a positive circle, and rich people then believe that they will be able to create more money by creating more business plans, and banks create more money, and it's a virtuous circle, and it's an expanding economy. And we ended the video by asking, so this looks great. What's the problem? Well, the problem is millions of people in South Africa don't have proper homes. We need massive amounts of infrastructure. And we have millions of unemployed people. So there's some disconnect here. We need massive amounts of infrastructure. We have millions of people that are very keen to get jobs so that they can also have infrastructure. But it's not happening. We have an economic growth of 0%. We're not growing anything. We're not producing more. We're not building homes for people. Essentially, not much is happening. We're stuck. So let's look at this in more detail. What's important to realize is that money is not a natural resource. It's not like gold or cement or other kinds of natural materials. It's a human construct. We think up money. It's the same as centimeters or kilograms. And let's say you're building a house. You would be quite amazed if the engineer walks up to you and says, "Sorry, we cannot continue building your house. We have run out of centimeters." It's obviously a ridiculous concept. We cannot run out of money because money is not a physical thing. It's just numbers in computers. So saying something like the following, we cannot do this because we do not have enough money is actually nonsense. What does it mean when we say this? It does, are we really not doing things because we don't have enough points which we create in computers? That doesn't make sense. So what is going on? Is it perhaps the case that there is a shortage of something that money represents? So obviously, it's not that we don't do something because we don't have enough points. It's maybe that the points represents a shortage of something which blocks us from continuing. So let's see if this holds true. Let's take the challenge of building 1 million European-style apartments in Gauteng. So which of these is the real reason why we do not do it? Is it that we cannot do this because we do not have the raw materials to do it? Well, absolutely not. South Africa is one of the countries in the world most endowed with a vast amount of natural resources. So we can create as much cement, bricks, piping, whatever else it is that we need. And we have the manufacturing skills and capability to create the materials that we need to build European-style apartments. So might it be we cannot do this because we do not yet have the infrastructure needed to do it? Well, absolutely not. This is about creating infrastructure. So the point here is not you don't need infrastructure to create infrastructure. Infrastructure is the core thing which you need to create from raw materials. So there is no lack of infrastructure in South Africa that will enable us to build European-style apartments, because European-style apartments and the water reticulation services, etc., that goes hand in hand with it, and the roads and so forth, they're all core infrastructure. So there's nothing stopping us from building this. Might it be that we cannot do this because we don't have the skills to do it? Well, the The engineering challenges with building European-style apartments have been solved for centuries, because much of the European apartments were built either more than 50 years ago, or some of them more than a century ago. So there's nothing particularly difficult about building these European-style apartments. And South Africa certainly has the skills and the engineers, and the civil engineers, etc., to build these apartments. So might it be that we cannot do this because everyone is already fully allocated doing more important things? As we saw, absolutely not. We have at least 8 million people unemployed in South Africa who could be able to work and who could help to build these apartments. But we're just not doing it. So we have the labor available and the skills and the raw materials to build these apartments for our citizens. Maybe it's more likely the case that we will not do this, because the people that could do it do not see the benefit for themselves in doing it. Mostly the rich and banks, but also us as a broader society. So we can build these apartments, but the ones that have money and skills don't see the benefit for themselves, because they don't see how people moving into these apartments would be able to pay them for their time in creating these apartments. So the situation we're basically faced with in society is, sorry folks that don't have homes, we could do it for you, but we don't see any benefit for us directly in doing this for you, so you're just going to have to stay in your shacks. That's it. So we will not do this because people that get a home must pay for it. And to pay for it, they must have a job. But somehow we are unable to increase local production, leading to jobs. Therefore, it's essentially a decision that we are taking as a society to not create European-style apartments for our millions of people that need homes in South Africa. The result is what money4mzansi calls South Africa's economic development constraint number 1, and we'll see more constraints in this video. So this one is the rate at which we create the core infrastructure that our South African people desperately need: homes, roads, water reticulation, etc. The rate at which we create this core infrastructure depends upon the rate at which rich people and banks believe they can make a profit by creating new productive infrastructure. And that productive infrastructure would then enable banks to create the debt-based money needed for infrastructure creation, such as homes, because those with jobs would then be able to pay back the debt to banks. Now the problem here is where this red arrow is. It's the rate at which we create homes depends on the rate at which rich people and banks believe they can make a profit by creating new productive infrastructure. So the need of our people does not lead at all to the creation of desperately needed infrastructure, even though we have all the raw materials needed and the available labor and skills. We just decide not to do it because rich people and banks don't see the benefit for themselves in doing so. So how's this going, this investment by rich people and banks? If we don't have investment, as we see, we don't create more productive infrastructure, and therefore no more jobs, and therefore no homes. Well, it's going really, really badly. There is 750 billion rand sitting in corporate bank accounts. It's just sitting there. The rich people choose not to invest. They don't invest it because they don't see currently how they will make money by investing this money. So it's not being invested into the productive economy, therefore it's not creating jobs, and therefore it's not enabling the creation of core infrastructure and housing in South Africa. So let's summarize this as South Africa's economic development constraints. Number 1, core infrastructure creation is limited by the rate of personal risk, personal profit, personal property-based creation of productive infrastructure, a rate which currently is basically 0. Let's look at the next challenge of South Africa. We saw that there can be a virtuous circle. But this virtuous circle can also change direction and become a value destruction circle. And it basically occurs if your government is inefficient and corrupt, because the government collects taxes but doesn't invest it wisely, and it is inefficient. So instead of having one person to do a job, it requires two people to do a job. And not only that, much of the money is actually stolen. And that money often is used to buy foreign goods. And that means that this money is not being invested into the economy. And it's not enabling the economy to grow properly. It's being wasted. And that means business people don't want to invest more because they have this feeling that the productive capability of the economy is not going to increase, because whatever increases we achieve will just be wasted away by government. So investors become very wary of taking risks because they see the future doesn't look good at all. So if we collect less tax and waste it, so if we waste tax, rich people want to invest less. If we invest less, we create fewer jobs, and we create fewer infrastructure, or less infrastructure, and the government is able to collect less tax, which causes investors to become more worried and invest even less. And then we can collect less tax. And this is a negative cycle that occurs. And South Africa is essentially facing much of this, though we will see that corruption and government inefficiency is certainly not the primary reason for our inability to progress our economy to a joy economy by 2030. It is a key factor, but it is certainly not the most key factor. But it definitely is a constraint on the speed of our economic development, and it destroys trust and belief in society, which is a massive problem, as we'll see later. So problem number 2 is government inefficiency and corruption. Another challenge, let's say Vusi, this time, doesn't want to open up a KFC. Vusi believes that he is going to make money by opening up a furniture store. But Vusi is preparing this business plan, and as he's preparing this business plan, he realizes that he's going to have to take on more debt. He's going to have to go to a bank and maybe this time borrow 10 million rand to create this furniture factory. And he's thinking twice about this. What is Vusi's concern? His concern is that if he's going to make this good quality, high value furniture, who is he going to sell it to? Because many millions of people in South Africa cannot afford furniture. So this is a kind of a chicken-egg situation. Vusi doesn't want to create this furniture factory because he doesn't see that he doesn't want to add to the amount of furniture production in South Africa because he cannot see who's going to buy it. But that's a pity, because if he did create a factory creating more furniture, well, that would create more jobs. And more jobs means that there would be more people that could buy stuff. So the chicken-egg situation here is that if 10,000 entrepreneurs at the same time went to banks and then said, we want to create a large range of new productive assets for clothing, furniture production, food, farms, etc. We will massively increase production. Then guess what? There would be jobs. And people having jobs means that people would be able to buy the products as we increase manufacturing and production. But it's a chicken-egg thing. Everyone has to take the leap of faith together. We all have to have confidence that the economy is going to grow, and therefore there will be people that can buy the stuff that we produce. But this is a very difficult situation. So which investors are going to have the guts and take the massive risks to just say, I believe it will be fine, and I will create this factory, I will create more furniture, and I know that I will be part of the process of creating more jobs, and therefore there will be people that are buying my furniture. As we can see in South Africa, this is not happening. So that's the first challenge. Believing that there will be enough others that expand our economy and create more productive money and assets that there will be more jobs and therefore people to buy the stuff. Now, not only must you get over that hurdle, the second hurdle is there are already people in other countries producing these goods. There are furniture manufacturers in China and all over the world that produce millions and millions of pieces of furniture per year. And they have been doing this for a long time, and they are very, very good at it. So not only must you have a leap of faith, you must also compete against the absolute best in the world. Now, this is difficult to do, very difficult, and it's natural. Consider how nature works. If you go to a lake and you're walking along the edge of the lake, and you see amongst the plants and the reeds and so forth, you see small little fish. So why are the small little fish on the edge of the lake? Well, it's because they're protected there. And if they would swim into the center of the lake where the big fish hang out, they'd all be eaten for breakfast. And this is very much the situation in economies across the world. If you, as a small little company, just starting out, just trying to compete, you're a small little fish. And if you are competing on a global scale with the biggest, baddest fish in town, well, you're probably going to get eaten for breakfast. So it's a very, very difficult challenge to, as a small little fish, jump into the middle of the lake and just start competing. So how did other countries do it? If we're having these challenges, well, how did they get around it? Well, let's see. So this section is basically about mercantilism being very much alive and well in history and right now. So the example is about Great Britain. And Great Britain acquired for itself colonies, subjugated vast parts of the globe for its own exploitation. Whilst back in the United Kingdom, on their little island, they also were going through the Industrial Revolution, being able to use steam power and machines to massively increase production and gain many skills to produce all kinds of products and services for the world. Now, the game which Britain played, and many of the other colonial countries, was the following. So you have the mother country, in this case Great Britain, and you have colonies. And the game was, the only thing that you buy from colonies is raw materials. Gold, silver, fur, lumber, cotton, foodstuffs, etc. And you don't allow the colonies to produce manufactured goods. You make it illegal for the colonies to produce manufactured goods. So they're only allowed to export raw materials to you, the mother country. And then at the mother country, you take all of these raw materials and you upskill your people and you use technology and you build manufactured goods, which you then sell at great expense back to the colonies. So this is a nice little recipe. So your balance of trade is very favorable. You are exporting much more than you import. And your country becomes richer and richer and richer. Now, the colonies, of course, did not enjoy this at all. And America was frustrated by many of these laws, forcing them to be unable to manufacture goods and only focusing on raw materials. And like many other countries, America wanted to control its own future. And what occurred was the American states got together, and Jefferson, Adams, and so forth penned the Declaration of Independence, where the US said, we will no longer be under the subjugation of Great Britain. Of course, Great Britain was rather upset about this, and this resulted in the American Revolutionary War in around the 1770s, 1780s. And luckily for America, America won this war, and it gained control of its country and what it is allowed to produce and what it is not allowed to produce. And as America gained independence, its first Minister of Finance was a chap called Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton came up with the economic plan for America, and this plan was followed for the next couple of 100 years, right up until where we are today. So what was the basis of this Hamiltonian economic plan for America? Well, the first was that there should be a banking system for the creation of debt-based money so that productive national investment can occur. So control their own money, create money needed to fund the development of productive assets. The second part was to jumpstart the economy by massive infrastructure investment by government. So jumpstart the economy by massive infrastructure investment by government. And at the same time, you enable national manufacturing development by protecting it with import tariffs and subsidies. So what happened? I mean, in America, how did this pan out, this Hamiltonian economic plan? Well, what was interesting is America essentially, though it was at that time one country, it sort of devolved into two kinds of countries inside one country. And in the South, you had the plantation owners, the slave owners, who were happy to produce the raw materials and export them to Britain. In the North, you had the folks that lived in cities and wanted to become a manufacturing economy that can compete with Great Britain. So the North wanted to protect its manufacturing industry with import tariffs. They knew they were small fish. They knew they couldn't, swim in the big lake and compete with the big fish. Therefore, they need to protect themselves in the shallows. They needed to create an area of protection so that they could develop and learn the skills and be able to manufacture and compete against Great Britain and others like France. While in the South was very much against import tariffs because everything they produced, they sold to Great Britain and others. So they didn't want to get import tariffs because then Great Britain would stop buying from them. And the slave owners didn't care about production or manufacturing or anything like that. They just wanted to produce more raw materials using slave labor and sell these raw materials to Great Britain. And if they wanted anything that is manufactured, well, they just used money and bought it from Britain. So the slave owners really didn't care about the rest of America or the slaves. They just cared about creating raw materials for Great Britain so they could be rich, and the stuff they needed they just bought from Britain. So obviously there was a big clash between the North and the South. And this resulted in the US Civil War. And yes, aspects of the war was about should there be slavery or should there not be slavery. But the main reason behind this US Civil War was trade policy. The North wanting to protect its industry and become a manufacturing economy, and the South not wanting to protect its industry and wanting to be able to export and wanting to use slave labor to be able to do that cheaply and effectively. Luckily, the North won the US Civil War. And this is what basically happened in terms of import tariffs in the US through the last 250 years of economic development in the US. So in the period from 1800 to 1850, average US import tariffs was 17%. So what that means is, for any products that come into the US, the government would add 17% to the price of, well, an average of 17% to the price of any imported materials. And that 17% was pocketed by government and used for investment into local infrastructure. So on the one hand, it caused imported products to be more expensive for citizens. But on the other hand, it enabled local manufacturing companies to compete against the best in the world by protecting them with these tariffs. It's like small fish at the edge of the lake needing protection before they can go and compete in the middle of the lake with the big fish. And this was only possible because America won the war against Britain. And then, as we saw previously, this eventually led to the US Civil War about trade policy. And because the North won, they massively increased import tariffs, protecting their local industry even more. So there was a period of about 50 years where import tariffs in the US were basically about 30%. So they were really, really protecting and allowing their local manufacturing ability to develop, capacity to develop. What happened from the year 1900 to 1950 was very interesting. During this period, the rest of the world went through many wars. In Europe, the First and the Second World War, and there was wars fought in Japan and China and many of the major other countries in the world. And much of their infrastructure was destroyed and had to be rebuilt again. The interesting thing is America was involved in these wars, but none of its own infrastructure was destroyed. And America was selling products, services, weapons to the rest of the world engaged in these world wars. And previously, America also had already 50 years, from 1850 to 1900, to be able to develop its own manufacturing capability, so it could compete effectively with the greatest producers around the world from 1900 to 1950. And in this 50-year period, because the other nations were also involved in major destructive wars, America was able to become the strongest economy on the planet. So while other countries were investing in weapons and trying to kill each other and destroying infrastructure, America was building up its infrastructure, which already had 50 years of protection. And by the end of the Second World War, America was the strongest economy on the planet. And from 1950 to 2000, America really dropped its import tariffs. Why would it do that? Well, now it was the big fish. If you're a big fish, you don't need protection anymore. You swim in the biggest, baddest part of the lake, and you can compete with everybody. And not only that, everyone is buying your products. So you want to promote people dropping import tariffs because you want to sell your stuff to everyone that you can find on the planet. And what happened from 2000 to today is that the import tariffs dropped even more, down to 1%. So this indicates that America really is in control of the global economy, and they're able to compete with anyone, and they are selling their products and services to everyone. And they want to get rid of tariffs because they're not protecting themselves anymore. They want to sell to other countries, and they don't want those other countries to be protected. So interesting thing, though, is from the 1950s, the tariffs may have dropped, but government subsidy of industry increased massively via defense spending, government spending, research and development spending, and other techniques where America's government was massively subsidizing the development of future technologies. So that's basically the US economic story. So the recipe for national success, the Hamiltonian approach to national development, is number one, government-directed, debt-based money creation must drive the development of national productive capacity, and not speculation. Number two, massive infrastructure investment by government using this money, thereby stimulating demand. What this basically means is, in step one, we create money. Step two, government spends that money into the economy by building the infrastructure that citizens of the country need. And by building infrastructure, that means they're paying salaries with that money they created. And by paying salaries, it means that the people of the country have money to buy stuff. And if people have money to buy stuff, well then, you enable your national manufacturing development by protecting it with import tariffs and subsidies. And now people have money because of the massive government infrastructure investment. And not only do they have money, they will also now buy it from their local manufacturing industry. And this is it. This is so why are points 2 and 3 in a different color, in yellow? Well, they are intricately linked. You cannot do the one without the other. Let's see why. Let's say we in South Africa decide to invest massively in new infrastructure. So we create 1 trillion rand of new money, and we record it as a debt basically against ourselves. And the debt is essentially a mechanism to be sure that we invested the money wisely, or to check whether we invested the money wisely. So let's say we do this, and we create all the infrastructure that we need, roads and homes and everything else. That means we are paying R1 trillion worth of salaries to the people that's building this infrastructure. And they're going to take those salaries and they will want to buy stuff. And if the majority of what they buy is made in other countries, then this money that we created is going to disappear. It is going to sit in the bank accounts of foreigners. And our balance of trade is going to be terrible. And what basically happens is as a country we'll become bankrupt because we're supposed to pay that R1 trillion of debt back. So it's the mechanism we use to track whether the money we create is put to good use. And yes, it might be put to good use by building infrastructure, but if, as we pay it out in salaries, it's used to buy just foreign goods. And then our balance of trade is messed up and we become bankrupt because the money is now with foreigners and we can't pay our debts. So number 2 and 3 are intricately linked. You cannot do the one without the other. So this is a problem. So essentially what the problem is just, let's go back to the slide. This means that because South Africa doesn't have a well-developed manufacturing industry, what this means is we cannot create money to build core infrastructure faster than we can export. So the rate at which we create the infrastructure that our people need is limited by the rate at which we can export, because we don't have a well-developed internal manufacturing industry, and we have to manage our balance of trade. So this is a really bad situation to be in. So this is our third point of South African economic development constraints. It's our rate of internal infrastructure development is constrained by our rate of export. And this is because we don't have real local manufacturing capability. So this Hamiltonian approach to national development, has it worked anywhere else? Absolutely. It's how all the developed countries in the world develop themselves, by creating and controlling their own money, government-based spending to stimulate the economy, and protection of their local industries as they develop. Same was used by the Asian tigers, and they were actually benefited by increases in globalization capability. What basically happened was containerization occurred in the 1970s, and it's quite interesting. Just the fact that shipping used standard size containers massively improved the efficiency of shipping goods from one country to another, and we could build these gigantic ships with massive amounts of containers on top of them. And this basically enabled the global outsourcing of manual labor-based manufacturing and assembly. And this was enabled by something as almost silly as containerization, reducing international shipping costs and the efficiency of loading things onto and off of ships and onto trains and distributing them. So the Asian countries really use this very well. They use this export-led manufacturing opportunity as a springboard to a developed economy. Now, the interesting thing in the Asian case is, as we discussed earlier in the video, if you're an entrepreneur and you wanted to start a clothing factory like this clothing factory here, and you only sold domestically, you would basically have to take a leap of faith. You would have to hope that the economy is growing and that therefore there'll be people that have money and therefore they can buy the stuff. But if you're in Asia and you are going to try and sell your products, which you can produce more cheaply because you have cheaper labor, if you're going to sell it to America, you don't have to care about the rest of your economy also growing so that they can buy the stuff you produce, because you're selling it mostly to foreigners. So this is the great thing about export-led growth. You use your manual labor, cheap manual labor, your people, to produce goods. You don't have to care about your own people buying these goods. You sell them to foreigners, and the foreigners want to buy them because you can produce them more cheaply because of your manual labor. And the Asian countries have become the manual labor manufacturing centers of the world, from producing our clothes to producing shoes, with thousands and thousands of people in these factories, all the way through to putting together your iPhone or your Samsung phone. And this has worked. This is Shanghai in 1990. And you can see this little clock tower over there where this mouse is moving. So this is Shanghai 1990. Here is Shanghai in 2016. That's just 26 years. And it's almost unbelievable how Shanghai has developed in these 26 years. It's almost the same amount of time as for which South Africa has become a democratic country since 1994. But you can see that there was massive development in Shanghai. And just to show you that this is true, there's the little clock tower again. There's the clock tower, and here it's again, but it's just now almost invisible because it's surrounded by so much new development. So this definitely has worked for the Asian countries. So can we do the same? Unfortunately not. We cannot do the same. And the reasons why is explained in the next video, which discusses future challenges to our present that we face in South Africa today. So please watch the next video to understand why we cannot do what the Asian tigers have done. Thank you. This is money4mzansi, working towards a joy economy for all in South Africa. Future challenges